Okay, so we
Boom.
are live. Well, yes, we're live and we're
Yeah,
broadcasting.
yeah. I mean, you might be watching this later, but it's
Yeah,
live right
yeah,
now,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so you
So,
can watch it while it's happening.
yeah.
But we're in our new places. You're in your new house,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
I'm in my new apartment
You're in your
across the
apartment.
country,
Yep. You're in Tennessee now.
Tennessee, Chattanooga.
Right. Right. Choo choo.
Actually, I'm like a few blocks from the Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Are you really?
Oh yeah, right downtown. Yeah, so
So
it's a
far,
thing.
it's been a good experience, I hope.
Yeah, yeah. Chattanooga's this cute little. It's not little, but I mean, it's significantly smaller than uh, Vegas, but
Right. Right.
it's a neat little spot.
Yeah.
I like it.
Good.
Yeah.
Really. Yes, no, there's a lot that's happened. I don't think you and I have actually recorded while I've been here.
Mm-mm.
My other house sold finally March, and then at the same time, because investment opportunities here in Vegas are real estate investment opportunities in this town are unbelievable right now, and I was really lucky to find something. As of that house was selling, I was bidding on other houses. I was doing like every time I was bidding on a house, I was bidding on three or four others because it's just
Right.
been so crazy here. And
Unbelievably bad. Yeah, it's the same here. Same
oh,
here.
is it? It's like that
Yeah.
everywhere. But I was really
Everywhere.
lucky here and got it, and I was one of two, and I got the house. And again, uh, I've already made a significant amount of money on this house just in how the equity has gone up. So I have no complaints at all.
Yeah,
and,
if you can
and I'm
get.
actually really happy here. I'm happy in this house, so I'm not planning on going anywhere for quite some time. So,
Yeah,
and I love
I'm a
Vegas
little
anyway. I
nervous.
don't want to. I don't want to leave Vegas. So,
I'm a little nervous about what's going to happen after the moratorium for evictions ends, and
I've
how
been
that's going to
talking.
impact.
Right. I've actually been kind of grilling some real estate experts on that, and they're not thinking that that's going to make a significant impact at all. They're not even thinking that because the trajectory is they're anticipating prices are going to keep going up, maybe slow down a little bit, but going up at least until 2023. And then it will correct itself, but it won't. The baseline will be basically where we end up by the end of this year. That will be the baseline. And so anyone that got in, was like moving around in the housing market over the last 18 months is actually going to fare pretty well. Now, if you start getting later into 2021 or 2022, mm, but as
Um,
long as you did
it'll be
2020 or 2021 early, then that's what their assessments are, their predictions. Of course, anything could happen, but
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't think 2008 would happen either. You
No,
know.
that's true. At least here in Nevada, when I've brought that up, they've said, well, because of the safeguards that are in place here, especially, and with the kind of economic growth that Vegas is in particular
Mhm.
expecting with the Raiders and a lot of tech companies coming here and the Tesla loop or whatever the boring loop that Musk is doing, that we are not going to, and with the migration of Californians, that our property values are not going to see a big dip once they start
I'm
leveling out. And I'm like,
right.
okay. So
Yeah, the unfortunate side of that is rent, and I don't think a lot of people are taking into
no,
consideration. I think it's going to
rent
push a
is
lot of
ridiculous
people.
here. I
Yeah.
have someone who's trying to move out of a house that she shares with family, and she's looking at a studio for $1,100 a month, and that's Las
Yep.
Vegas.
Yep.
That's a mortgage payment,
Yep.
and like a
I
two
always make the
bedroom is
yeah.
1,600. That's more than I pay for my house.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
I always make the argument when I first moved to Vegas in 2012, I had a two-bedroom, two-bath apartment for $750 a
wow,
month.
wow,
That's it. And it wasn't in the greatest part of town. It was
right,
actually right across the street from the Hard Rock, which was right close to campus. So it
right,
wasn't like super great, but it was still in the heart of everything.
yeah, yeah,
Two bedroom, two bath. It
yeah,
was a double studio
yeah,
or double master.
Yeah.
for 400 or for $750.
Oh,
And that
no.
same apartment is double, if not more than that now.
Oh, yeah. One bedrooms are anywhere from like, she's been looking actively because she has to move in the next couple of months. 14,
Mhm.
1500 for one bedrooms
Yeah.
in reasonable parts of town. Like
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
you get up to Summerlin or where I'm at, because I'm right at the base of one of the mountains here. So you get up here, 2,200 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. I mean, it's unreal, the rent amounts.
It's
And I'm like,
bananas. Yeah.
there's no way I would have rented anything here. And I never, like, this is like California level stuff.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And Californians are coming here going, oh, that's so cheap because, a shack is $1 million there. And I'm like, wow,
Right.
so, yeah.
So yeah, we'll see how it all happens. It's
Yeah.
happening all over the country.
Yeah,
We'll see,
yeah.
how it plays out.
Right.
So what are we going to talk about today? What's the
Oh,
topic for today? You seem kind of have a fervor of this one.
yeah. Well, yeah.
It's a good one though.
It's a
I
good
like it.
one. There was a article in Psychology Today
Mhm.
that what seemed to particularly target a study from 1998, surviving this. Hang on, let me pull it up here. Surviving disclosure of infidelity, and there are problems with this paper to begin with. Okay, so I had a lot of issues with it, and I also felt that some of what their findings were important and relevant. And the Psychology Today article.
Right. So let's lay it
Yeah,
out. So
yeah,
this
right.
is an article by Dr. David Lay. The
Mhm.
title is "Full Disclosure After Infidelity: A Flawed Process." So it's basically David Lay critiquing
Yeah, that
the
1998
practice.
and the
Well,
practice of, yeah,
he's critiquing the practice of full disclosure
right,
of infidelity,
right,
right? But he cites this 1998
yeah,
article,
yeah,
which
in particular,
um, right, and even in the subtitle, it says 25% of marriages end after the full disclosure process, and he gets that number from this
from that study.
1998 article.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
because it's important to set all this up because I think when we start critiquing it, it kind of
yeah,
there are things that have to be addressed.
right.
So, all right, what, what's your main issue with it, or
Well,
what do you think?
so it. I'm gonna start. Let me start with the article in Psychology Today,
Okay,
um, briefly, and then I'm gonna refer back to the original paper. So the argument here that seems to be made is, um, that this 25% is this huge number, and that the disclosure process.
full disclosure process.
Well, and the thing is that, and I read it over, and maybe I missed it, but if we're what like full disclosure, what does that mean? Does that mean you're telling your other partner who you cheated on daytime, duration, position, and so forth and so on? And it kind of goes into that a little bit, but
That's
it's
what I gathered.
it's sort of my sense of this article in Psychology Today was it really didn't dive too much into data. It was more, let me cherry pick some statements that were made by some therapists, and I'm going to make this loose implication that this disclosure process just is a bad thing. And but the language that was used was kind of tiptoeing around stuff, and um it wasn't solid. It didn't depend on solid data. It wasn't, you didn't have, here's a study and here's a study and let's look at these different studies to see. It was like, well, there's not really a lot out there, but I talked to a therapist and I talked to this dude, and it was just a bad scene for them. And I'm like, well, okay. And I wanted to actually look at what this particular study found, which I also had some issue with.
Hmm.
But I don't feel like the Psychology Today article adequately represented the paper itself. It sort of twisted it and made it a negative, and that paper, I didn't get the sense of that from the actual study. So there's that. And you and I are going to later on. We're going to talk about how seriously people take Psychology Today and other kind of opinion pieces, and and lean heavily into them in terms of like
Hmm.
other data and other research, which is problematic. So I was curious. That article made me curious about the original study, and so I pulled it up. The first thing that I had a problem with, and I'm going to go into the problems first, is the article, the journal that it was published in, which is Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity. Now, I have some intimate knowledge of this particular journal,
Right. So the
and
piece that
that's
you're
like I think
talking about,
a whole other episode,
right?
actually, just that
And
journal, which I don't think it's even
right.
called that anymore.
Right,
Um,
and the journal title or the article title in the journal is "Surviving Disclosure Infidelity:
yeah,
the results of an international survey," and it
right,
gives a number. And this is by Schneider, Corley, and Irons back
yeah,
in 1998.
98, right.
98.
And the language that I have an issue with is of recovering sex addicts. And you and
Right,
I have had conversations about this idea of sex addiction.
right, and I think right. So it's dated. It's
Yeah, it's dated.
now
And that's my other
uh,
question. Why go back to
22
this
years
study? I
old
mean, aren't there
or 30
there's
years old.
yeah, it's 20 years old. Like
Right.
why go back to this particular study? Why
I
that
wonder I wonder if this study is used a lot in other literature. And also I think looking at David Lay's like wheelhouse, right? His wheelhouse is anti-sex addiction.
yes,
And I think the article is written in contest to exactly what you're talking about, this whole like sex addiction model.
right.
And he's kind of arguing against it, saying it's
But
flawed and all this stuff.
that's already a known quantity with him.
Right. And
That
I
is
think he's
already a
just
known
doubling down
quantity.
on it.
Like
You doubling down on it
yeah,
with this article.
other than that study, I don't there's no meat to that particular Psychology Today article other than well, I talked to this dude and I talked to that dude, or this therapist and that therapist. And just and but again, we're gonna talk about opinion pieces in Psychology Today
Right.
later on.
But I think he
So
was using yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
talk about
So
that
we'll talk
later.
about that. So okay, so the things that stood out, first of all, um, a lot of this was based on people who are in 12-step programs. And for those that don't know what a 12-step program is, it's programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Food Addicts Anonymous, et
Sex
cetera, et
Addicts
cetera, et cetera. Yeah, yeah,
Anonymous.
yeah. Okay, and the 12-step program itself is based on religion. Okay,
Yep.
and there was an original person way back in the 70s,
Bill something.
Bill, right, right, who created this way of addicts coming together, people who identified as addicts coming together and providing peer support for one another. And books were written from that and so forth. But a lot of it is rooted, it is rooted in religion.
Hmm.
Okay. So let's start with that. So one could argue, being the contrarian that I am, these days, one could argue that it would be easy to target or dismiss this paper because it could be argued that it's rooted in religious doctrine, the 12-step program. Okay. So, and there's a lot of consequence that comes from the idea of a paper being rooted in a program that's rooted in religion, because there are, what's the word I'm looking for, there is a certain
Biases.
there's a certain kind of absolutism in religious doctrine. Okay.
Hmm.
And if you have a 12-step program that's based on that, those absolutisms quite likely could be uh, uh, what could be the roots of the 12-step program. Okay, so there's that. All right, things like penance. Okay, in a 12-step program, it's the fourth step. Okay, so there's that, and we could get into all of that. And full disclosure, I was someone who struggled with alcoholism and got sober in her 20s and was a part of the 12-step system for quite some time, for like 20 years. Okay. So full disclosure on that. So I have intimate knowledge of it, and I have critiques of it too. And I have my personal journey of um, not no longer being an alcoholic has deviated from the 12-step program at this point, only because it didn't serve me anymore, not because it was problematic for me. So I want to make sure, full disclosure here. Okay.
I
uh,
actually went to Alateen when I was in middle school.
oh yeah.
So it's teenagers with alcoholic parents. We
Right.
all went as a
Yeah, you have
family.
Al-Anon and
uh,
Nar-Anon and stuff
Right.
like. Right.
So, which is for the spouses of
Right.
alcoholics and things like that. So there's
And I
actually all these same setups
yeah.
for people who are not alcoholics, but you still go through the same steps, the same
You
process.
same,
I
yeah,
think.
they all have this kind of they even have atheist 12-step programs
Hmm,
and so forth. So um I am not here to bash 12-step programs at all. Not here to
I
bash
will.
them.
I'm just kidding.
And I'm not here to bash them because yes, while they might have a low success rate, there are those who have centered their lives around these programs and who have enjoyed long-term sobriety in the 30 and 40-year range, as long as, some people even as long as 12-step programs has been around. So I'm not here to bash them. Do they have a low success rate? Yeah, yes. But for the people for whom it works, you do you. Okay. um so that's my critique of this paper for to begin with. um and the paper uses that a lot of research from Carnes, who is sort of the father of the sex addiction industry. um and a lot of the language in here is 12-step language. The
Hmm.
alcoholic, it's not the husband and wife, it's the alcoholic and his wife, it's the drug addict and the drug addict and her husband, and God willing this, and so forth and so on. So this paper in particular is very rooted in that
Yeah.
12-step doctrine. Okay.
Yeah. Relapses, using the term
Relapse, yeah, they use
relapses and things.
all the language that I came to know as someone that was in 12-step program. So again, that's a problem. However, I think their methodology seems solid. um they did surveys of licensed therapists, so forth and so on, and got some interesting data. um and they do sometimes use things like compulsive behavior. They don't actually always use sex addiction, but they default to that a lot. Okay. And they do things like, say, co-addiction, which is codependency, and it's just like I have a problem with a lot of the language that's in here. And again, it's like, how long has this person been in recovery? So it's a recovery paper. Okay, just what it is.
See,
Um,
my criticism is actually the methodology.
okay, go ahead.
The sample size is entirely too small. The sample size is not. So in the subtitle,
164 people is too small.
it's not 164 people. It's 82 of each side, but it's not
Oh,
82 couples. It's only 48 actual couples.
okay.
And then, because what they did was they sent out this survey.
Yes.
Again, my issue with trying to take quantitative measures of this qualitative issue.
Right.
They sent out surveys to couples based off of these therapists. So it's a snowball or convenience sample, which is fine. I use that.
Yeah. Okay.
That's not the issue.
Yeah. And
But I use that,
that's where I didn't have the issue.
right. But I use that in qualitative methods, not representative quantitative data. Like
Mm.
this is not representative. And I think they do a poor job of explaining that. Like this is not a representative sample by any means
No,
whatsoever.
no, because a lot of this, okay. So
Yeah,
you
this is a
you
big
are
case
right.
study, is all this is.
You are right in that the respondents already have problematic relationships. We're not talking about people who have moved on from infidelity and no longer have a problematic relationship. It says here nearly all 90% of the respondents had seen or were seeing professional counselor or therapist.
Mhm.
So
Right. That's not the
anytime you
issue.
see a therapist, there's already a problem, usually.
Well, that's not the problem I'm having. The problem I'm having is them trying to claim that using statistics. Statistics are often used for generalizability. These are not generalizable remotely, and they don't talk about that.
Oh, okay.
Um,
No, they're not
the problem,
generalizable because
yeah,
most people aren't in recovery. Yeah.
and 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 really they didn't. Like, I understand why they didn't, but they're over representing their sample. Again, it's not 164 people, it's 82 sex addicts, so it's 82 of the problematic folks. Well, I don't want to say they're
Which,
problematic, but
again, we have a
right.
problem with that
and
language
th-
anyway.
and then 82 spouses or partners,
Yeah.
the majority being the spouses or partners are women, the majority of the sex addicts are men.
Hmm.
um, so with that, but again, it's not 82 couples. It's only 48 couples. Only 48 actual couples responded, and the rest are individuals. So the rest are so out of the remaining to the 82 are random folks that they're then comparing to the same number of other random partners.
Mm.
So yes, I get where they're coming from, but they needed to stick to one side or the other. Like, I understand there. So are these couples? Are you looking at couples and how they're going? Or are you looking at individuals? And so they're comparing slightly different components. And I think that's where we're getting. So, and again, David pulls this 25% from here. Well,
Yeah.
it's 25% of 82. It's not 25% of 164.
Hmm.
It's actually a really low percentage, or it's
It's
really
yeah,
no,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
really no number. But again, using statistics on what I argue is a case study, a large qualitative case study,
Mm.
they would have been better off doing interviews as opposed to quantitative measures.
Right, right.
But that's the problem with psychology. They don't know how to do qualitative measures very well. Well, they didn't in 1998, I can tell you.
1998. Right, right, right. So, some of the things that I agreed with here in this study was the the ineffectiveness of threats to leave. Right. So they actually found that let's see, 44% of the respondents threatened to leave or actually received a threat to end the relationship.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm sorry. Let me do that. 44% reported having received such threats, and 60% of partners reported making such threats. Okay, so and not only did that not stop the infidelity, but oftentimes pushed the offending spouse into more secrecy. Okay, so I
Mhm.
definitely I agreed with that. I thought that, you know, if you're going to leave, leave. And I was actually really surprised by the fact that it was only 25% who ended up leaving.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
that
surprising.
in spite of threats, um, in spite of during a lot of times during the therapy process saying, well, I'm going to leave, and that actually really surprised me. I'm as a not only as a, and well, I'm not in professional therapy anymore, so I can't say that anymore. But as someone who, let me personalize it, as someone who has been cheated on, uh, upon disclosure of that, I filed for divorce. There was no question that it was, oh well, and my reasoning was, I've practiced non-monogamy for a long time. If a partner is being unfaithful, I have no reason to stay because the trust is gone and there's no reason to be deceptive because I practice non-monogamy. So I was actually surprised that it was only 25%. And I made the mistake of assuming that a lot more people do because I do. Like I have,
Mhm.
and that was I projected onto others. So that kind of took me back. I figured it was closer to like 40%.
Yeah.
Um, it wasn't. However, What I wasn't surprised by is that they found a large portion of the people who made the threats and then stayed continued to struggle with trust. It just, that was um, the problem, that, or the long term consequence is a large, a sizable uh, portion of the respondents continued to struggle with trust issues. And just on a personal note, that's why I didn't stay. When I found out, I was like, yep, nope, not going to be able to trust them again. I'm out. So that was just something that I personally didn't want to have to deal with. I don't want to have to be, if I have to be suspicious, I don't want to be there. So, and it also, and the thing is, and I don't, I'm trying to remember if he made that point. He made the point himself in the article. The David Lay made the point himself in the article that if you do decide to stay, there are other ways to conduct the therapy that are more affirming. But he didn't. I'm looking at it, and I don't see that this was what they suggested as well. That full disclosure isn't necessarily the best way forward, and that there are tools that are helpful that don't necessarily always require this full disclosure. You don't have to go, and this is a thing in recovery. It's when you do step 6, I think it's step 6, where you basically, step 6, where you just lay it all out on the table. Well, even someone who's been through the 12-step program numerous times, it says right in the literature that that's not necessarily something you have to do to the people who you've offended against. It could be your sponsor. It could be another addict in recovery. It could be anybody. It doesn't necessarily, and it says right in the literature, you could do more harm. And they say that in here. And I didn't see that he mentioned that they actually stated, hey, there could be other ways that are a lot less painful for people to recover from infidelity.
Right. But I think what David's getting at in his article is that full disclosure is used as a therapeutic practice. He referenced Gottman. If you go to the Gottman website, you see that they talk about complete full disclosure and honesty. It's a therapeutic practice.
Yeah, but again, nobody's specifying what full disclosure is. It is, yes, I was unfaithful. Or is that, to me, that could be just full disclosure of, yes, I was unfaithful in time, day, place, position, how long. What is full disclosure?
I think full disclosure is after the fact of the knowledge of infidelity. It's a therapeutic practice, so they know infidelity's happened, and full disclosure is a practice of just like, I cheated on you. Okay, let's work to get past it.
Right.
The therapeutic practice is, all right, well, let's dive into every situation, what happened, and they reference that.
But I don't think all
sometimes it's so advanced that it's like positions and
yes, I know that,
how many times and all that stuff.
We can't generalize that all therapists approach it that way.
But I think he's arguing against that practice, that even don't dive into the full disclosure practice. And I think that, but I think some people bristle at that. I think some people
have have a practice of full disclosure. We're still only talking about 25% of marriages end in divorce, whether or not there was full disclosure. That's a very small number.
And I think in this article, it's 25%.
Well, 25% of the
full disclosure. Yeah, 25%.
No, it's 25% who end the relationship.
Based on infidelity.
Based on infidelity, not full disclosure. It's based on infidelity. Whether or not there was full disclosure, even if there was just suspicion.
Yeah, you're right. This article, that's what they're saying. 25% of the people, 25% of the offending folks or offending relationships with infidelity ended in
divorce,
or
separation, whatever. Yeah. That's a small, and you're talking, that's 25% of the people sampled.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so again, do I think there are other ways to move through infidelity? Sure. Am I going to go full Esther Perel? Never. Okay. However, um, I think that
I love that you reference her all the time.
I think that that I don't know what. Okay, sure. I think everything is worth looking at, but I don't think it's that big of a problem. We're not talking about 99% of relationships explode and blow up, and everybody's harmed because of disclosure. We're talking 25% of people who responded to this particular survey. That's a really small number. So the
Yeah.
argument full disclosure is so problematic, it doesn't resonate with me.
Right. He actually references that. He references that we don't have clear data of whether or not this works. But he leans to the side of it not working. But again, he's leaning to the side just based off his conversations. So again, so I think this is the time to dive into
Yes.
this issue
Yes.
of psychology today,
Yes.
which for those of you who are paying attention, who know what this is,
Yeah.
or have ever used it on a paper,
Yeah.
psychology today is not scientific, accurate
No,
journal,
it's a
peer-reviewed
magazine.
journal stuff.
It's like
It's an op-ed
it's
magazine.
an op-ed magazine, and it's a magazine just like Marie Claire, and
It's Cosmo for
it's
psychologists.
Cosmo for psychology, and every profession has them. Every profession
Mhm,
does, and it's a way for more high profile psychologists to seem famous. Oh, they wrote in Psychology Today. It's 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 a it's a magazine, and it's a
right, it's a way
magazine of
to reach
it's
other
a
psychologists,
magazine
really, and it's just
of
psychologists who read it.
yeah, right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think some like regular folks read it as well, and that's the problem.
I think it yes, and we've talked about this, how media is really lazy, and I have seen Psychology Today pieces used in media,
Yeah,
and I think it's bad.
in media, and unfortunately, some people cite it in their research.
Mhm,
Uh-huh.
I agree.
And so I think that's a bigger issue. Is the biggest issues I had with the paper from 1998 was that it was rooted in a 12-step program, which is rooted in religion. Okay, and there are going to be built-in biases there. The I don't think that all of the data was uh or all of the findings were a problem. I think you can find some tidbits in there that deserve further investigation, that
Mhm,
have some validity, I think. But I think the bigger issue is Psychology Today and people taking it seriously when maybe they'd want to be more critical of um, that
yeah,
magazine and what it actually is. Right? It's
yeah,
not a scientific journal by any stretch.
no, it's not.
It's opinion
Um,
pieces by people, and this same argument could be made for like awards shows or anything else. The people that write in Psychology Today are the most high profile people in a field at any given time, and those all tend to be very homogenous.
mm,
It's
sometimes.
it's who's who gets their face out there the most.
Mhm. I think it is a neat okay, I will say it is a neat place to be able to, like, share budding ideas, like, to get feedback out in the ether of budding ideas. I think it's a good place to do that. Um, I don't I do bristle because 'cause I'm on the same page. I do think it's used inappropriately by media and people using it in papers and not understanding that it's not academic,
I think
like,
it's
peer reviewed.
inappropriate on the part of some of the people writing in it. It's an exercise in fame more than it is and maybe I'm taking too much of the Charles Moser approach. I had a conversation. Charles Moser is a really well-known researcher in my field, and he has this position. I only write journal papers. I don't do interviews. I don't do
Yeah.
magazines. I do journal papers because I want legit, genuine research, and I want it to be challenged. And that can't happen in the media and in rags. Like that's,
and I think
he equates all these kinds of magazines to basically rags.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain level of responsibility that needs to be taken that, it's conjecture at best a lot of times. They might cite sources, and that's great. I appreciate when they cite sources and they do their due diligence in
Yeah.
their research. But a lot of it, again, it's been magazines, so a lot of it's conjecture. But when you have, your high profile person, people tend to believe everything you say.
Yep. And only
so
because they see you most.
Right, and I think there's a certain level of responsibility whenever you're writing something like that to say, like, this is not scientific, or acknowledging that this is conjecture or opinion or something like
That's
that.
opinion. Yeah.
Or you're fleshing out an idea, which I think is fine. I think
fine.
using psychology today to flesh out an idea, because you're going to get feedback from it, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
But acknowledging that it's just a budding idea, that it's
Right.
not like specific.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yep.
And I think that's what you have here. I think this is David trying to flesh out an idea, or, of this challenging this full disclosure model based in his research of anti-sex addiction.
Which brings its
His
own biases
stance
with
of,
it.
yeah.
Which brings its own biases with it.
What do you mean?
We as scholars are not exempt from allowing our biases to influence our work. And when you as a scholar jump on a bandwagon, that's possible for you to be blinded by your own ideology and rhetoric, and the rhetoric of those who share your ideas. And one, like, as an example, one of the things that I appreciate about our episodes is we're not going to let each other get away with anything. Okay.
Right.
You have your biases. From my perspective, sometimes your biases around sociology are irritating. Okay. And having said that, I know that I can be just as ideological when it comes to sexology. And admittedly, in the last year, I've fallen into this habit, and I don't know where it came from, where I'm challenging even my own ideas. Like, I have this idea around sexology, and I'm like, you know what, blah, 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 and I can find some research for it, and I go, you know what? F you, you're wrong, and I'm going to prove it to you. And it's like, okay, me, okay, thanks, me. It's like I'm doing that a lot, and this, with you and I doing this, helps in that. Like, I'm really going full contrarian, even with my own thought processes and my own sort of like looking into data. I start looking at something and go, well, see here, this supports and I'm going, yeah, but where's the research that doesn't support it? Where's the research that conflicts with that? And what's that based in? And I think we have to be really careful, especially with our more high profile brethren, that, well, if you jump on an ideology, people are going to listen to you because you have fervor. Rah, 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 rah.
I agree completely. I think what you're doing is what you're supposed to do as a scientist. I think that's good science, is to examine both sides and to try to, and I think that's the pursuit of objectivity. Like, yeah, we have our biases, but you also, what you're doing is trying to pursue this, trying to be objective as possible, trying to remove your biases. All right, so you're on this ideology kick, but you're like, well, I want to challenge my own ideology. And I think that's important.
And it gets no papers written at all.
Right, of course.
Not a paper gets written about it, because I'm constantly going like, no, fuck it.
Right. I'm not gonna write this damn thing.
Then it becomes an exercise in philosophy. And then it's like, fuck, if I drank, I just go get drunk,
Right.
Instead, I just go watch TV.
Right. And I think a lot of high profile people don't do this enough. Like,
well, no, because they're so busy being high profile.
Yeah. God bless. I mean, I get Deborah So is pushing against this stuff, and I appreciate the work she's doing, but I don't think the woman has ever picked up a sociology book in her entire life. I've read her book. I've read her End of Gender.
Okay.
I get it. I get where she's coming from,
Uh,
but we've done this. Sociology is not something that just came up like, and she critiques women in gender studies. It's fine. Guess where women in gender studies came from?
sociology.
Us. It came from fucking sociology.
Oh.
So did political science came from sociology. We have political sociology. So a lot of things came from sociology.
Didn't I just say how he's
we've
describing
already
like
been
sociology?
talking about this. It's like, have you read Steve Seidman? Have you read Jeffrey Weeks? Like, pick
I know
those
that
up.
name. I know that. I know the Jeffrey Weeks name. I don't know where I
Yeah,
know it, but I know that name. That rung a
because
bell.
he's a prolific sociologist who studies sexuality and gender.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ding.
like she's read. Yeah, none of this. She
Well,
references
you
none
think
of this.
she'd have?
Gail Hawks. She hasn't read any of it. Like she doesn't reference it. She doesn't do in her book what you just said.
Well, isn't she a neurologist though, or a
Yes.
neuroscientist?
Yes.
Okay.
So
well,
she's
then
basically.
I would assume that she would only reference biology and so forth.
She critiqued women in gender studies in her book.
Okay, I haven't read her book. I admit I haven't
She
read her book.
critiques the notion of social construction of gender, but doesn't go to the root of the people who actually talk about it,
Oh,
which are sociologists.
okay.
She only references women in gender studies.
Oh,
Sorry, you lost and you left out a field that has been around for a couple hundred years.
okay.
Like,
I see your point. She's not.
like,
she's not referencing
yeah.
back. Right. Okay.
Right. Sociology has been around for a long time. And it's just like this.
Check your
Yes or
biases
no.
there, my dear. Check
Yeah.
your biases.
Now, granted, I realize that sociology doesn't have a career track other than making other sociologists. Like, I understand the pyramid scheme I'm in, but
Yeah.
like the research is there. We do it.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Right.
yeah.
Well, I think you and I have argued before that each one of our fields does the research, but that work of late has gotten rather shoddy in some area, in some cases, where it's like, look, I have a sample size of 27 and I'm going to generalize this, and it's just college students, so I'm going to generalize, I mean,
Yeah.
and that covers all of
Yeah.
the
Or I have a sample size of like 15,000, but it's all college students who had to participate. Like they were all in introductory psychology courses that all had to participate in research on campus to pass the class.
Yeah.
Like that's not coercion,
Right.
or and I don't want to dive into the impact rates of journal articles. If you don't know what an impact rate is, for those watching, impact rate is how often your article gets cited. And if it gets cited more, it gets a higher impact rate and more people cite it.
Yeah.
What happens is that actually there's been some legal issues
People
of
cite themselves.
People cite themselves, or it's like a collection of a few people citing themselves.
Yeah.
I don't want to attack Debbie Herbenek, but she definitely loves to cite herself.
Yeah, there's
a lot of those folks who love to cite themselves.
Yeah, there was a recent award that was given out to her and a few other people. I can't remember what university it's from, and I saw that, and I'm gonna, again, full transparency here. My lip kind of did a Billy Idol thing where I was just like, and I say, and the reason that the reason I wasn't impressed is because I received something similar a few years ago. And nothing about the work that I've done has changed since I got into this field. It was just that I happened to be interacting with the people who published those award lists more than I had in the past, right? So there was my level of high profile, low profile, whatever profile hadn't changed. My work hadn't changed. Nothing had changed. I was just interacting with those people more. Right? I came to their attention, but my work hasn't changed. And I think I'm probably doing myself a disservice by saying all of this because, and maybe I'm a person with autism, and we have this bad habit of doing ourselves a disservice by just going, well, that's bullshit, So, but I think I would argue, and I'm gonna get so much trouble for saying this, But I would argue if you are running in certain circles and you are doing a lot of work in those circles are going to recognize you. Okay, can we just say that? It's just the way that it is. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just the way that it is. If you are running in certain circles and you are of a certain stature, you're going to be awarded more. It's like the Academy Awards. It's like, VH1 awards. It's like, well, this person had the most sales. So, or, we really like this person because they came to our office the most. So we're going to give them an award.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm an
research being
asshole.
done.
I know. I'm sorry.
But I know, but there's a lot of research out there that's being done, and it's hard to sift through it all. It's hard to look at who's
Yeah.
doing what and pull people out. So if you're part of organizations and high profile person of organizations, you're going to get selected. I understand that.
Yeah.
I suffer from that the Marx quote of, I would never join a club that would have me as a member. I'm not part of any organization. It's
Yeah.
troubling.
Yeah.
I'm not much of a joiner.
No, me neither. No, I'm just not. No. And so I'm not going to ever enjoy walking up to a podium and getting an award. It's okay. That's fine. Now I agree with you. As soon as I tend to, that's a good one, but I also have I always worry about groupthink. Well, we're a group
Yeah.
and we're going to start becoming homogenous. Right.
Yeah. Well, we
And,
talked about that of what happened, even in sex research, there's groupthink and it impacts the way sex research is being done
who's
and
being
things like that.
published. Right.
And who's being
There was
published.
actually an issue recently that came to my attention that I wasn't aware of. Ken Zucker is the editor in chief of the Journal for Sex Research. I think, if I'm wrong, I'm going to get
Is that
skewered.
the Journal of Sex Research is Kinsey's journal, the journal that comes out of Kinsey Institute.
Let me double check. I'm going to make sure I'm right. Hang on.
Yeah.
Okay. As I'm looking this up. Okay, sorry.
So let me ask this.
He's the editor-in-chief of Archives of Sexual Behavior. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So he was just reelected as the editor, and I think he's been the editor now for 25 years of one journal. And I started, I follow him. I'm friends with him on Facebook, and I follow him on Twitter, and we've had some communication because we're on similar listservs and stuff. And I admire a lot of his work. So there's that. But I started seeing on my Twitter feed some threads of people who have routinely been turned away from even having their papers reviewed because of his perspectives on sexology and sex research. Where there was one trans person. Now, that person could have been guilty of this sort of screeching trans ideology that people are accusing each other of and stuff like that. But they stated online that their papers are routinely turned down for even review, and they've been labeled a screeching trans ideologist or something to that effect.
Yeah.
So again, we're getting into that. I'm making so many enemies with this episode. Holy shit. There's that group think, everything stays the same effect, it's going to be our way because it's been this way for 25, 30 years, all of that. Oh, I'm in so much trouble. Oh my God.
It just goes to show that, sexology is not exempt from,
No,
everything else that happens in the world. It's normal.
Right. Yeah. It's like,
yeah.
and I a really quick anecdote. I brought up recently on Facebook how I have enjoyed this contrarian side of myself and being able to express it with just about any woman scholar that I come in contact with. And not all male scholars, but I have noticed that as I have challenged people, I have been there's been an attempt to silence me on the part of some men. I've gotten messages even piss off, you bitch, to you're full of shit, fuck off, don't come back on my feed. And I try not to be I mean, I'm abrasive sometimes, but I'm not. You're such a fucking dumbass piece of shit asshole. Blah 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 blah. It's more like, yeah, no, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong. And it's like, you know what? I think one of the arguments I got into was this. How I disagreed with using ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy and advocated more for Wednesday Martin's disclosed non-monogamy because of the ways in which ethical and consensual set up power dynamics, and superiority. And one of the scholars was like, actually two, who are really well known, one in the gay community and one in the straight community as poly advocates, who were like, fuck off, you bitch. And I'm like, okay.
Struck a nerve, did it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. But I've only gotten that reaction from men, only from men, which I found really interesting. Not all men, not all men. I'm saying that too. Hashtag not all men, but from men. And how much does that play into maintaining certain power structures in our journal publications?
I think so. Going back to this thing, and with I'll use David Lay as an example. David
Yeah.
Lay's wheelhouse is anti-sex addiction, right? He's
Uh-huh.
also anti-porn addiction. So this framework, he has this niche in that he's an expert in.
Uh-huh.
And I think when that gets challenged for some people, especially if it's your whole framework. So talking about
Your
this
career,
ethical
yeah.
non-monogamy, like if that's your whole framework, that's your whole career, and someone comes along and says, well, actually, ethical, we had this whole show about that.
Yep, with
The use
Wednesday,
of the
yeah.
term, with Wednesday Martin, Dr. Wednesday.
Dr. Martin.
Yeah, good reference. That, it challenges or critiques that whole system. People get upset about it. I mean, I understand it, but going back to exactly what you just said about doing your due diligence, of being objective and looking at multiple perspectives, people aren't doing it.
Yeah, I did this podcast with these very young, two young women out of New York recently, and I'll repost it when they post the podcast. And we got to talking about hookup culture, and they both said that one of the problems that they were struggling with was the narrative in hookup culture, that it's no big deal and that it's centered around sexual freedom and that way you can explore yourself. And that secretly, or not secretly, but there were many of their peers who not only found it unrewarding and unsatisfying, but some of these young women who found that it they didn't use the word harm really. It was more that it did them a disservice, not only being a part of hookup culture, but the narratives around hookup culture. Because some of their friends were like, oh, dude, I like fucked 5 dudes like this past weekend, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, but was it satisfying? I don't know. It's what you do. We're hooking up, whatever. I got, it was cool, all those dicks. Like, I'm so progressive and I'm so woke and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, but was it satisfying or rewarding? Not just on a physical level, but an emotional and psychological level. And they don't feel like they can talk about how that it's not, because in their circles amongst young women, if you're not woke and hooking up, you're a conservative harpy who's been unduly influenced by your religious upbringing, and that's the default. Like they're not given a voice to even share, hey, this doesn't work for me. Or they're maligned for the fact that they have a certain faith structure. And I'm a raging anti-theist. And I still have if someone's choosing to live their life a certain way, whether it's theistically or not, and people are being maligned, that their own personal choices, I have a problem with that.
Yeah. I mean, that could.
And you're studying hookup culture.
I'm trying not to dive into that, because
whether
that could be a whole topic in and of itself.
Yeah. Whether it's woke ideology or conservative ideology or religious ideology, when it silences people and their experiences. And you have this whole movement in even psychology where it's like, well, it's your experience, but that's just your experience, and that doesn't mean anything. And it's like, and that's part of the problem with the gender ideology is like, well, this is my gender identity, and you have to respect it regardless of so forth and so on. And people fighting back against that, well, that's unfortunately trickling into people's sexual experiences. And if there's a culture that's mainstream that they're not enjoying, they're maligned and pushed away because it doesn't match the ideology. And it's that, again, I'm coming back to that contrarianism in me. Like, I'm constantly back and forth, like, nope, that doesn't work because that, and it's, I don't get any papers written.
Sure. But I think there's a certain element of like, you ever seen that, like,
challenge me on this, Josh. Come on, challenge me on this.
you ever seen that meme where there's a number written on the ground and it's two people from different perspectives, and one's like, it's a 6, and the other one's like, it's a 9.
Yep.
The problem with that is someone wrote it. Someone came in with the initial idea. The problem too is we have to look at the underlying structures that create these things. It's essentially, this feminist argument. Not to bring feminism in this, but
No.
ultimately it's this idea of false consciousness within feminism, which is a problem too. False consciousness is this idea that if you go along with domesticity, you're just lying to yourself, based on Marxist principles of, false consciousness of the proletariat.
Yeah.
But addition to that, you also have to look at the systems that create these things. And we've seen these other memes where it's like juxtaposing two different women, like one's in scantily clad dress and the other one's in like this very modest dress,
Yeah, she's got
maybe
books.
even like a hijab or something like that. It's like they're both empowered. It's like, well, yes and no.
Right.
Yes, I see where you're coming from, but also what are the systems that they come from that create both of them?
Right.
I don't want to say the one with hijab is more, repressed. No. It's both of them. Exactly like you're saying. What's the system that's pushing the girl to wear the miniskirt? What's the systems that's pushing the woman to wear the hijab?
Mhm.
Are those, grounded in these underlying biases that aren't being addressed by either side?
Right.
Are they ideologue, or is it just ideologues that push this narrative of wokeness or push this narrative of liberation?
Mhm.
And I think you have to look at both those systems to be able to examine that.
Right.
I think it's important.
Yeah.
So going with that, we'll jump back on this article. We feel like we've derailed for a little bit. So I was having this conversation with my lady last night about this thing.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on full disclosure? What's your opinion on disclosure? Say you break up with someone and you did cheat on them.
Okay.
What's your opinion on disclosure after the fact?
That's
because we really haven't given the principles of what's on this article.
That's a good question.
Because
are you
because I
asking
can tell you,
from a professional standpoint or a personal standpoint?
Both. You're professional and it's your personal. But let me give a perspective first.
Okay.
While you're thinking about it, in relationship to this idea of full disclosure, is I feel like full disclosure, and it's talked about this, that like, and I'm stealing from Michel Foucault in this, is that oftentimes disclosure is confession. We love confession. We love confessing everything.
You've brought this up before.
Right. We confess to everybody. We confess to doctors. We confess to mental health people. We confess to priests. We love giving that confession. And I feel full disclosure, or disclosure after the fact, are processes of confession that unburden you. They unburden you with with what you carry around and put it on the other person. And then the other person is then burdened with that truth. And in relationship, how confession works is they then get to tell you what you did wrong. You're relying on them to decipher what you did is wrong. And then tell you the penance, tell you what you can do to fix it. rather than you putting in the work to try to fix it. You see this a lot in cheating. Like, oh my God, I cheated. Now I need to bend over backwards to whatever my partner wants to make it better, as opposed to, because then they're just acquiescing to that aspect of the confession rather than being a proactive, well, how do I rebuild this trust? Rather than, okay, well, I'm just going to let them to decide and tell me what I did wrong and how to fix it. In a way, it's kind of like laziness in a way. I get it that people want to know, but there's this other dark side of it that's like this confession. The listener becomes the master of truth. I think that was cited by him. Like, that's a direct quote. Like, the master of truth gets to decipher what is right, what is wrong, the penance, how to get past it, if they can. You know, I'm of the opinion that if you cheat and someone finds out, you might as well just wrap it up. Just, you're done. Like, that trust is never going to be rebuilt.
I'm
That's my
going to agree
opinion.
with you on that last statement wholeheartedly, 100%.
Okay.
Okay. You're
All right, my
so
rant is done. So here.
yes, you're right. If someone finds out that you've cheated, from my perspective, the relationship is over. Just walk. Um, only because, as someone who has, even as a non-monogamous person, had it happen more times than I care to count. Um, and in her younger years, committed the same crime. Okay, so I'm gonna own that. When I was my first marriage, I was unfaithful, and I hid that from him. And even 20 years after the divorce, it's something that I swore I would never do again, and didn't, because I recognized the harm that I caused in him. Um, and he didn't want the marriage to end. He wanted me to stay, and I ended the marriage. But um, so I'll start with personal, and I'll go to professional, because the professional one is really easy. The personal one isn't. It's a little bit more complicated. So your first question was disclosure after a breakup.
Mhm.
Okay.
We'll start
Now,
there.
I have a very recent example of that. My most recent divorce, I found out nearly a year after, from what I understand, the affair started, but only found out from others um, about 2 weeks after the divorce was final, that the person he ended up with, he had been having an affair with.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, so you could argue that he didn't tell me. One would assume, anyway, if I wanted to, you know, conjecture he was being nice, which I'm not giving him that benefit of the doubt, that he didn't want me to hurt. Okay. So let's assume that most people just don't want their partners to find out because they don't want to hurt their partners. Well, the argument then is, well, if you're doing it and you know that it's going to hurt them, then why are you doing it? Okay. You're keeping a secret, and
Mhm.
you're doing something behind that person's back, which disrupts the trust that you have worked so hard to build, which is why people come together, one would hope, to have a long-term relationship. Okay. um, the
Follow
effect
you.
that it had, one would hope, the effect that it had was, um, it solidified. Well, there were a number of other disclosures from various other people about other things anyway, but that one in particular solidified for me that leaving was a a good decision. Okay. And I found out about all kinds of other non-disclosures, but that one in particular was sensitive to me because I had been divorced previously because of that particular partner also having an affair for a long period of time that I didn't know about. Okay. So was it still painful? Of course. And as of March of this year, from what I understand, that person is still in his life. Okay. Well, I made the conscious decision to leave for a whole number of other reasons. That was just another reason why I am confident that the reason that I left and filed for divorce was a good one. Okay. It
Yeah.
still hurt, but it was kind of like what I found. It was just another one of those. Oh, okay. I found out about another non-disclosure. Okay. So it hurt for an instant, but in the end, it was it gave me an extra layer of confidence that I made the right decision by divorcing that person. Okay. Um, so I don't think that the injury, um, if it's disclosed after a breakup, is any more or less severe. It's, I think there's just a different perspective on it because the relationship's already over, right? There's not,
Maybe.
for me, there was a release of responsibility to try to make it work, right? Well, I want to do everything I can, and this person cheated, so we're going to try therapy and we're going to try all these relationship building things. I was relieved of the responsibility of having to do that because I found out after the divorce that there had been an affair.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in a way, it was less stressful. Still painful, but less stressful. Um, which by
You
contrast,
experience you still experience the betrayal though.
yes, the betrayal was the same. Because if I referenced it back to my previous marriage that where I filed for divorce because there was a long-term affair, but I found out about that affair while still married, and it blindsided me. I had no clue that the affair was going on. I thought our relationship, while it has its challenges, was fine. We had been together for over a decade. We raised children together. It blindsided me. And it was like someone sliced me off at the knees. And we did the whole, went to therapy, tried to make it work. He moved back in, so forth and so on. It was actually the children who said, get divorced, please. This is hurting you and it's hurting us. No, both of my
Yeah.
kids, my son and my daughter, were both like, Mom, divorce dad and be done with it because you are in agony and fuck him. Right. So I filed for divorce a lot because my kids actually said, stop, don't do this. Just be done. But the injury was more immediate or it was more severe in the immediate because I didn't know anything was wrong. With my most recent divorce, well, we were already divorced. There was obviously clearly stuff wrong already, major stuff that was wrong, but the betrayal was the same. It was just where I was in the relationship that was different, and the impact that that betrayal had on me in the moment.
Yeah.
But the betrayal was the same. Yes. Yeah.
So
So,
do
okay.
you think sorry.
So that's me personally, and we can get questions like me as a professional, as a relationship therapist, retired from that particular field. Um, it depends on the couple. It's not my job as a therapist is to not shield people from the consequences of the behavior or to shield people from pain. My job as a therapist, at least the way I was trained, my job as a therapist is to walk through a person's experience with them and to manage it as best as we can, keeping in mind the consequences and the pain that might come with it. So, um, it's not up to me if someone decides that their partner is cheating on them and they decide to stay. That I don't have the right to tell them not to. I might not be the best therapist for them in that case, but it's not my right to tell them, well, here's a book called Leave a Cheater, Gain a Life from Chump Lady. Here, you need to read that and dump this piece of shit. Okay. That's not my job as a therapist. So they're separate.
Right.
Okay.
So, and I think going back to this article, what David Lay is laying out too is that it can be painful and difficult for the therapist to facilitate that for the couple. And I think that's his
Disclosure
reference
process?
to what?
The disclosure process?
Yeah. And I think that's his reference to people, to therapist friends of his, or people that have contributed to this piece of their experience trying to navigate that full disclosure uh, practice and how difficult it is for even the therapist to do, or the impact it has on the therapist. So it's interesting that even the therapist in this process would have experienced some pain trying to navigate this between um,
Because
a
it's
couple.
probably I would guess, and this is just a guess, that because most therapists are human beings and they've probably experienced a betrayal of this nature in an adult relationship. Not all, Not everybody is in a relationship where
Hmm.
there's cheating, but if you look at the numbers of how much infidelity there is out there, it's more likely that the therapist you're working with has had that experience. And because that experience is painful because of betrayal, right? Because you
Hmm.
had an agreement with, you thought you had an agreement with the partner that they decided to violate without your knowledge and your consent. Okay.
Okay.
So, where you thought you were making decisions together. Yeah. Are you telling your partner, hey, I'm going to, is it okay if I go get my hair cut today? I'm going to spend 20. You might, there are some things that you just do because, you're doing them, you're living life, what have you. Um, and I know someone's probably, there's going to be a challenge to porn usage. Okay. And I, I think I should challenge myself, but to me, porn usage falls into that's, private, personal, sexual behavior that
Hmm.
most likely isn't harming anyone unless XYZ ABC is going on as well. Right.
I don't
Um,
know. Is the
but
spouse
I could be
reading
challenged
romance novels?
on, huh? Well, yeah,
Is it?
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
But there's challenges to everything. Just like you said, one person writes 6 and the other person writes 9. So I want to acknowledge that. But when it comes to these things like the sexual agreements you have between one another, where you're sharing sexual experiences with your bodies, with your minds, with your hearts, and one person makes a decision for themselves without that other person, in spite of the risks that come along with that, financial, emotional, physical, etc. That's a betrayal that's significant, and I would guess that a lot of therapists have had that experience, and it would trigger old painful memories, I'm guessing. I mean, is that the argument that he's making, that's why that could be one reason why that process of walking through a couple and their disclosure process is difficult?
No, I don't think it has to do with like what is that?
The therapist
Projection
experience
or
projection,
anything
okay.
like that. No, it has to do with the actual process can be painful for the therapist. Just that it not in their own personal life, but just all right. So now I got to sit here and watch this person tell all these really painful, like trying to get the
Right.
person to tell and, try to then probably negotiate or mitigate the
Yep.
yelling and mitigate the
Yep.
trauma and mitigate
Yep.
the person being confessed to,
Yep.
it's to then be mad
Yep.
and loud and
Yep.
because that's what our society says. You get to be, the most self-righteous person
Mhm.
in a like when you get cheated on,
Right.
which I don't agree with,
Mm.
but that's probably something that the therapist then has to
Right.
navigate and try to, it's like, look, you don't get to be a fucking cunt just because he cheated on
Right.
you, you know?
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's probably hard, because
Hmm.
when I was working as a rape counselor, at a rape crisis center as a counselor, there was a debriefing process for me with another counselor after my work.
Hmm.
Um, when you have trauma that you are working with people through, um, I don't know if you can be a feeling person and not have it affect you in some way. And at least my experience when I was doing therapy was it was required at the center that I worked at, that after we worked with survivors for several hours, that we had our own debriefing session for an hour.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So now therapists who are working in regular therapy, this was obviously an extreme situation. I was working at a rape crisis center. Therapists who are working in their office, I don't know that they have the opportunity to debrief. And I think if you're working with betrayal, betrayal in a marriage, especially around infidelity, that kind of service should be available to therapists to get a opportunity to debrief after they have to walk through that. Because whether or not you have people in our field who are arguing that, well, it's that person's perspective on whether or not they perceive it as a betrayal or painful, I'm not going to buy into that. I don't agree with it. It is painful, and it is painful for a large majority of people.
Hmm.
And therapists, I think, have a responsibility to recognize that and to walk through that and to give themselves space to, um, have good coping skills, which can include their own therapy around the work that they do. That's me.
I get that.
Yeah. So, whether or not someone agrees that infidelity is painful, a lot of people experience it as that, and that's good enough for me.
But going back to the comment about why is this empowered, right, for the two women in this. I think it's also important that we rarely discuss is why is infidelity painful?
No, I think it's discussed a lot.
Is it?
Yeah, in our field anyway. I mean, in sexuality, it's discussed a lot.
Hmm.
And you have some scholars that are on one side that are like, well, it was your religious upbringing. They find all these reasons why it's painful.
Hmm.
And that might be true, but that doesn't mean we get to dismiss the pain. Whether you grew up in a Christian fundamentalist household or you grew up where you had a drunk father who was beating his mother and running around and banging everything that he could, I don't care. If it's painful to someone, I'm going to be witness to that pain, and I'm going to be a safe support person for them to work through that. If they want to explore their origins of it, that's okay, but that doesn't mean we get to dismiss it, and it doesn't mean it's invalid.
You don't think as a therapist you can you can challenge that?
That's
You
up.
can
Nope,
challenge.
nope. That is up
Hmm.
to the client. That is up to the client. I will
What
never,
about
if I ever
what
get back
about
into
outside
private
of
practice,
therapy?
I will never lead someone down the path as to, well, what do you think your pain is based in? Nope. I'm there to witness their pain and to help them through the suffering. Period.
But don't we do that with other things? Don't we do that with anxiety and depression? We try to find the cause rather than just looking at the pain.
Yes, but we don't negate the pain because of the origins of it. We don't negate it.
Right. Right, but but with therapy you try to rationalize where it comes from, thus help negate the pain.
There's
But
your
with infidelity, we
there's your
don't
mistake.
we
There's your mistake. You just used the word rationalize. We
Mhm.
don't.
Well, to understand. I mean, to understand where the depression or anxiety comes from
Yeah.
helps you kind of
No,
work through it.
no, no.
So it's just better than to not do that and give a medication? Just because you
Uh,
have if
okay, you
my
jumped the
knee
gun
hurts,
real
so
quick.
we talk about depression as being something, the brain as an organ, right? And
Yes,
depression being something that happens in the brain, or anxiety.
sure.
If my knee hurts, I find out why it hurts.
Yes,
I don't just wallow in the pain. I find out why it hurts, and then I
yes.
try to fix why it hurts.
Oh, no.
Why wouldn't you do the
We
same
just
with?
made another mistake. We tried to fix.
I still try to fix my knee.
Okay, but we can't fix. uh, And you and I have had disagreements about this in our friendship too. Um, Emotions don't have to be fixed. They just are. Emotions
Right, but we're not
are.
talking about emotions. We're talking
But
about
you're talking
for
about
mental
pain. We're
issues.
talking about emotional pain. Emotional pain is, period. It is.
But it comes from somewhere. It's a
It doesn't
reaction.
matter where it comes from.
It
Emotional pain
does.
is. It just because someone can understand the source of their emotional pain doesn't negate the pain and often doesn't lessen it because it is. The pain
No,
is.
I believe it does lessen it. If you
It does.
understand where it coes from, you can
No.
avoid it in the future.
Why would you avoid a feeling?
You can avoid the triggers that cause it.
That's
You can
different.
avoid. Mm,
That's different. You're
but
not
but
talking
if we're
about a
looking at
feeling. You're not talking
right,
about a feeling. Yes, you're
also
right.
looking
I'm not going to get into another relationship where I'm cheated on, therefore I won't have to suffer the pain of infidelity. Of course.
right,
Yes.
but
But
or you can look
feeling
at
is
why you have an issue with infidelity to begin with.
that doesn't mean the pain is going to be any less.
Sure, it does.
No, it
You can
doesn't.
rationalize. Yes, you can.
Why would you rationalize away a feeling? It's
Because
a
we get older and we learn how to see. I think this is part of the issue with a lot of mental health is that we've moved away from understanding why we have these feelings to
that
then
doesn't
be
mean
able to
we're not
look
going
through 'em.
to have them.
You can have them, that's fine. But if you figure out why you're having them, it does lessen them. If you look at,
Not
say,
all the
childhood
time.
trauma, if you look at
Yeah.
childhood trauma, when you grow older, you begin to understand what your parents are going through.
Yes.
Sure, it but it helps you get past it. It helps you understand it.
You're talking about emotional maturity.
Yeah, I feel like
Okay,
we're not
that
giving that
doesn't
right.
mean we're not having the same feelings. It means that we have developed the skill set with which to navigate them better. That doesn't
But you
mean
understand where it comes from to begin with.
it doesn't change the feeling.
I think it
Okay.
lessen would help lessen the
It
feeling.
no, it doesn't. And I can use that personal experience again. I just told you I had the same amount of pain from finding out my ex-husband had an affair from when the other ex-husband was having an affair. The pain was the same. It was how I navigated it that was different. I had had now a 15 years between the first experience and the second one. And so I worked with my pain differently. The pain was identical.
But have you gone through and looked at why that caused you so much pain?
Yes.
Why the concept of infidelity has caused you so much pain?
Yes.
So why did you let it cause you so much pain?
It wasn't about letting it cause me so much pain. It was painful.
Mhm,
It was painful. I just dealt with it differently because I'm
mhm.
older, but the
Sure.
pain was the same. And I know its origins.
Mm,
Absolutely, I know its origins. I'm not going to disclose that here on a public
no, and that's why I'm not
space.
asking. It's
But
not that's
I have,
that's not the point.
after the first experience, I was in therapy for like 3 years, going back, going to the origins of why the pain is the way that it is.
Mhm.
Okay, and what the triggers are. The pain was the same, even now. It's just I coped with it differently, but the pain was the same.
I'll
And
take
that's
your word for it.
okay. That's the thing, is like, we live in this culture where feelings are a bad thing. They're not
Oh,
a
I
bad thing.
disagree. I feel like
Feelings
we've
are
gone the other
wonderful.
way, that feelings are the most important thing,
No, no. What
where rational
I
thought
think,
is tossed out the window.
well, in principle, I can't argue with you on that. I think I think though, the nuance there is, context is that we are elevating those who are less capable of coping effectively with their emotions and allowing the loudest people to have a platform.
Mm,
Okay?
that's fair.
Okay? So there is a middle in between both of those. We don't have to rationalize away our fear. Then we're losing ourselves to the ideology of, well, they're screaming banshees over here, centering their feelings and making it That's not feelings. That's dominance. The tool is emotions. It's dominance. Okay.
That's fair. I'll
So,
give you that.
okay. Feelings are okay. And we learn as we grow up and become adults, and that's delayed sometimes in people that struggle with alcoholism and so forth, because of the way the brain interprets emotions and processes it and how it's
Sure.
interrupted by certain chemical processes and so forth. Okay, but as we mature, that we have the same feelings, we just learn to deal with them differently. The feelings are okay.
Mm.
When we start to demonize our feelings, especially the negative ones, and that's what I saw in the research that I did with necrophiliacs. When they started demonizing their desires, their behavior and acting out got worse. When they
That's
found a
yeah.
sense of self acceptance and even altruism to those who were struggling with those same feelings, they were able to better cope with those emotions.
Mhm. I
It's
think you
a
see that everywhere. You see that in hookup too. That you were talking about hookup culture and the women having issue with it, or friends having issue with it. If
Mhm.
you come into it with a negative attitude, you're going to have a negative experience with it. Period. That's
Well, if you
anything.
come into it with a positive one and you have a negative experience, what then?
Majority people don't. Majority people come in with a positive perception. It has to do with the outcome of negative feelings after the fact. if you go in with a negative perception, or you have friends that have a negative perception, like you're going to have a negative reaction to it. But if you go into it with self-acceptance and a positive attitude or a positive perception, the majority of outcome is a positive outcome. Or
But
you
that
don't
might not be the
have,
case for,
or you don't, you have a neutral outcome.
that doesn't, okay, I'll give you that. Okay. And I would add to that, what might work for you in your 20s might not serve you anymore in your 30s.
Right.
Maybe you need something else, and that's okay too. Then hookup culture doesn't work for you anymore. I noticed that I've, over the time that, as I've aged, hookup culture was great for a long time until it wasn't, because I wanted other things. And I think that's okay to make room for that too.
Sure.
Well,
Sure.
hookup culture worked, when you're a 20-year-old, hey, hookup culture worked for me until I was 25. And then I really decided I wanted to be in a relationship and get married and have a kid. Okay.
Actually, in my research, I find that a lot of younger people hookup culture doesn't work because because they're still wrapped up in their peer group,
Hmm.
that they feel more peer pressure. Whereas older people who hook up have more positive experiences with it because it's something they choose to do as opposed to feeling peer pressure
Yeah.
around.
And that, I think
Yeah.
that's a really important word, is choose, to choose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To choose.
Because you
Well,
can be a person who hooks up a lot, because you're choosing to, and you're going to look at that experience and go, well, it wasn't really rewarding, but I went into it knowing what I was going to get into, and maybe I'm going to do something different next time.
yeah.
I would
Well, we
argue
have.
though, I would argue though that the people who engage in hookup culture make hookup culture really hard to want to stay in it.
Because I don't know. I don't really have an answer
Okay.
for that.
Like you, as someone who's dated you, you are a rarity. Like you communicate, you ask questions, you, when you're with someone, you pay attention to them and what their needs are. Pleasure
Mhm.
is something that's important to you. And I remember after I left the first time of us having an afternoon together, you're like, make sure you let me know when you get home, okay? That
Mhm.
almost never happens in hookup culture.
Hmm.
Okay.
Like,
So,
standard ways that, like, you have company over, that's just what you say. Maybe that's just my Midwestern roots, who knows?
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. So I would say that you're biased because of how you operate.
Got I don't know what these people have a problem with.
That is
I should write a
not
book.
the common experience. I've been very lucky that I've had a lot of um, ethical partner or sexual partners who were very similar, but they were rare, and I like, had long-term arrangements with them. That is not the norm. If you just go on Tinder and you meet up with someone, I'd say probably 7 times out of 10, it's wham bam. Thanks, I got to get going. I'll see you when I see you.
Mm,
And
yeah,
that, and you see that a lot. A commentary with women is like, I hung up my slut pants because I just, it was just so shitty. It was the people.
yeah.
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 So there's that.
We have gone so
Oh
many
my
different
God, it's
routes
an
in
hour
this.
and a half. I didn't even realize.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
We have gone everywhere
Oh
in this
my
one.
God.
Yeah.
Well, I hope
But
we're
thanks for
ending
all who
on a
stuck it
good note,
out.
because like you and I don't mean anyone harm. It's just you and I like to have these intellectual exercises, these thought experiments, and challenge just about any narrative.
Mhm.
I think you and I are inherently. I wasn't the contrarian at first. You were more the contrarian, and well, life experience as I've become. I think I have to monitor how contrarian I've become, because I think I could be a little excessive in it. But
So much fun, though.
it's so much fun because it really challenges your mindset on everything, but it
Yeah.
gets no papers written at
No,
all. And
no.
it's
You're
just
like a janitor. You're
mental
like a janitor
masturbation.
doing
Yeah,
good
it's
cleanup work.
mental masturbation. That's really all it is. So if I have offended anyone, any of my colleagues, it wasn't the intention. It's just how I operate these days. I'm contrarian, and I'm having a great time with it. And maybe that'll pass. I don't know. And I have a
Who
great
knows?
friend up there in Tennessee who helps me with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, whoever stuck around for all of this, I appreciate that. If you
Yeah,
watch this thing from start to finish,
right.
I realized we went down a lot of
There are a lot of rabbit holes
tracks
here.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's just what happens.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
so yeah, but
yeah.
thanks for joining us. So, and thank
Yes.
you for I know this is a little more in your afternoon. It's evening. It's already 8:30 for me.
No, it's actually, since I've been here, I don't have the same issues outside.
Yeah,
So I got some stuff done, and then I was like, yeah, I just get tired in the afternoon because I usually am up by 4 or 5 o'clock, and I was worried that I wasn't going to stay with it. But
sure.
I, sat down for half an hour earlier and just zoned out on music videos. So it recharged me.
Nice.
Yeah. So
Oh,
So thanks for sticking around, you guys. And we don't really have a set schedule of when we do Sex Nerd podcast. It's just kind of like, hey, you got a topic? Yeah, actually, I'm really pissed off about this. Okay, let's do a video.
right.
Okay.
Look for us on Facebook. Sometimes we post on there.
Yep.
You post on Twitter or you post on Instagram. You have our Instagram. You
Yep.
post stuff on there.
Yep.
Twitter, I am terrible at. But just
I've
pay
gotten really
attention. Look
tired
for
of Twitter. It's just rage porn at this
Yeah,
point, and I'm like, bleh.
yeah.
If
I
if
don't
I
know how
didn't
to
need
do
it for
Twitter.
if I didn't need it for the museum, I would log off from Twitter forever.
Yeah,
It's pointless.
yeah,
So yes.
yeah. And maybe next time, come up with that. I've got this idea.
Oh
I
yeah.
know. I don't. So next time we're going to talk
Yeah.
about
Let's
some
do that.
gender stuff.
Let's do more
Well,
mental masturbation stuff on that.
yeah, on gender.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about gender in sports. I actually have a very surprisingly, it's a fun topic
Yeah.
because of roller derby. I use roller derby as this microcosm for how complicated this concept of gender in sports is, which I think we should talk
You
about.
know what? Yeah.
Yeah, just like diving down the different avenues. I think it'd be important to do. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
I use roller derby as this example of
Yeah.
how it's way more complicated than what people think.
Yeah. Roller derby.
Even the
Yeah.
people who are like, "No, there's biological difference." Yes, you're right. But it's a little more complicated than that. And I can
It's
prove
more
it to you.
complicated than that. Yeah. Roller derby, I think, is a great example.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, all
Okay.
right. Well, thanks for joining us. See you next time.